Hello, so everyone's filing in here. Welcome. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 550th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, the Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Thornton Willis and Tom McGlynn. We are thrilled to welcome poet Erin Pérez here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Abstract painter Thornton Willis moved to New York City in 1967, studied with Mel Price, and was heavily influenced by American Expressionism. Willis's work has been widely exhibited, and he is the recipient of many awards and recognitions, including a painting fellowship from the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, a printmaking fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Guggenheim Fellowship in Painting. His current exhibition, A Painting Survey, 6 Decades, 1967 to 2017, is on view at David Richard Gallery's 2 locations through May 13th. Artist, writer, and independent curator Tom McGlynn is based in the New York City area. He is the director of Beautiful Fields, an organization dedicated to socially engaged curatorial projects, and is also currently a visiting lecturer at Parsons School of Design. He holds an MFA from Hunter and a BFA from the Ramapo College of New Jersey. Tom is an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Tom. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Thornton, for participating in this, and thank you to Fong Bui and Nick and everyone else who's so supportive at the Rail. It's my great privilege actually to get to know you and your work, Thornton, and I thought we might start with your drawings because when we spoke, when I visited your studio, it was very important to you, I think, early on. The practice of drawing kind of led you into being an artist.
Yeah, like most kids, I drew a lot. And it became an important avenue into my paintings. And as a kid, I always hung around with other kids who drew a lot and watched what they did. And if the line quality was what I considered to be strong, I would look at that student's work quite a lot.
Right. I think in some of your other interviews, you mentioned that you weren't really interested in people who could make a kind of representational likeness, but it was the line quality that really attracted you.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes.
Thank you.
These are obviously very small works on a notepad. It's a lined from a lined notepad, and they were ideas, just playing, just experimenting with shapes and trying to create an interesting kind of composition, relationship of the shapes, and I think use the asymmetrical kind of balance in these drawings.
Are these pencil, these particular ones?
I'm sorry?
Are these pencil?
Yes, they're all pencil. you see how it's like really drawn over and over and over, and then some places it's like very just touched. It's drawing is a very special thing. It's a way of expressing oneself.
Right, and dealing with that blank page, like, and here you can see the expressive line too, and you're
Yeah,
you connect yourself to that. You connect yourself to like the abstract expressionist, but I think it even came before you even knew about the abstract expressionist. Would that be correct?
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't know about the abstract expressionists until I was probably around 20 years old, and I was making drawings of things like kids do early on, very early on, and I never stopped doing that.
Right. I remember you saying that there was a point where some kids stopped,
Yeah,
but you just kept on going.
even when I was in the military, I'd have notebooks and draw a lot, and guys would, sort of kid me about, what are you doing? It's like, because it was a little unusual.
It's funny how when you do that, like you kind of can gather a crowd, even if you're just setting up an easel, like a plein air, painter. I mean, not that I do that, but people are still fascinated about this, the initial creative process, right?
I'm sorry.
No, people, it's just fascinating, the story about, people coming up to you in the Marines and saying, what are you doing? Because
Right.
it still has this magnetic kind of pull.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. I mean, people are, art paintings have no other purpose other than to be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
They have no other, there's no utilitarian value whatsoever in a painting. And that's its purpose.
Right.
Looked at and to be excited and drawn in by the surface and the composition of the piece itself.
That's, what was so exciting to me when I saw both your shows in David Richards' galleries in Harlem and in Chelsea. Just the sheer energy, of those combined works. I mean, they're also concentrated too, because they span what, 30, 40 years?
Oh, more, yeah.
Right. So it's, and here is one of your early pieces, which you've.
Yeah, this is, I think, probably one of the earliest pieces in the show. It's, from 1967, so it's the earliest. I had a studio before. I moved to 119 Spring Street in 68. So I made this painting as an experiment. It was very, very much an experimental kind of approach. And I didn't feel that it was as successful as some of the later ones that I made once I moved over to Spring Street. Mm-hmm. But this was a first attempt at this concept.
And this was when process art in this particularly the New York School was happening, and you were responding to that. But you also, I think I remember you saying you were responding to the literal architecture of kind of crumbling Soho walls and stuff like that.
Right. Soho was rusty, and there were no buildings that had fresh paint, been freshly painted. And some of these walls that existed where they had torn down a building before oftentimes had graffiti on them, or color from the building that was torn down before. And they were very exciting. The old brick gave them this kind of textured quality. And I had been looking for a way, because I knew Alan Sarrett, who's an important process artist in those years. And I liked the idea behind what he was doing, and I was searching for something to move it because he was a sculptor, and Linda Bengles and Richard Serra were connected to that group. And so I was looking for a way to move it into my painting. And I think I kind of found it with these pieces.
What's so interesting?
Later,
I'll go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, I was just saying, I have later come to think of as painting is process.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. What I was going to say is that it's so interesting to me that this period in New York, and specifically in SoHo, where there were artists who were working in, kind of a conceptual process oriented way, seemingly responding to, Pollock, but also like literally responding to their landscape. So you have people like Mark de Sivero, scavenging materials from abandoned places, and even Robert Morris with the felt pieces. I mean, I remember some of the still existing factories in Soho had like they would just throw out their scraps.
Right.
So scatter art, it came from a concept, but also came from a daily experience, and also so Alan Sarrett and
Richard.
Alan and Gordon Matta Clark were important in your early development and in their gallery at 112 Green Street, correct?
Well, Matta Clark he was around, but it was Jeffrey Paley. I mean, not Jeffrey Paley.
Jeffrey Liu.
Jeffrey Liu, who started that, and Alan Sarrett was involved with it at one point, but he pulled away and started his own alternative space at 119 Spring Street.
Right. And so that was a time when a lot of that was going on. Right.
And he had a few shows. I was the first show he actually had of these paintings.
No, it's just such an extraordinary time for you to enter the city. That was when you came to New York from the South in 1967, correct?
67, yeah.
Yeah. And I think Alan actually has a show up right now at Karma Gallery.
Yeah, I know they've continued to show his work quite a lot, even though he's sort of, in a way, been less active personally in the art world.
Could we forward to the next slide, please? Are these chronological? Yeah. Okay. So when was this painting done?
1979, it says here.
Okay.
This is actually kind of a prototype for the Lattice paintings, which I did later.
So it's interesting. It's kind of a pre-sentiment because you were doing other paintings at this time too.
Yes.
Which maybe
I always overlap things oftentimes. I mean, not always, but sometimes.
Well, that's another fallacy, I think, when you think of art in terms of periodistic.
I'm always trying to kind of push the envelope. I don't want to make the same painting all.
Right. And a lot of times artists are just organically working on multiple things at once. It doesn't really fit into neat kind of periodist categories.
Yeah.
But this is a significant painting for you, I think, or this series was significant.
Yes, this was a significant group body of work. The wedge series, I call them. And I had been after I had finished up with the slat paintings, I started working up on the wall again, and I started making bands at first, and then I started to zigzag them. And at one point, I was working on a very large one, and I blocked out either end and kept the middle and filled it in. And that was the beginning of that group of paintings. Now I came back to these zigzags later on.
So the wedge actually came from like the negative space of the zigzag.
Yes.
Can we go back to the wedge?
Mhm.
I think the first time
Now,
we've ever,
obviously, I mean, this is not that particular one that I was speaking of, that I did the first one. Its shape was a little different. Then later on, I made them four-sided, some of them.
and this painting, was this one of the paintings that was included in the lyrical abstraction show?
No.
Oh.
Oh, this is much later. The lyrical abstraction show was one of the slat paintings.
Okay, all right. I'm just getting my chronology a little mixed up. I think the first time I ever saw any of your work, I think there was one of these paintings that was reproduced on the cover of Arts magazine. It was like a double wedge.
Yes.
Uh-huh, right. I did some of those, right.
I don't remember what year that was. Maybe that was 81 or something like that.
Yeah, at some point I started to overlap them and move them in different directions.
Right.
And I don't think there is any in this show.
If
I
we
don't
could,
know if I have any of those left.
but they were. This was a very significant series in that period between, say, 79 and 81 was signal in your kind of your reception. You got a Guggenheim at that time, and you also got a National Endowment.
I got a Guggenheim in 79.
Right. It seemed like a really crucial time in your career.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was Frank Stella was on the committee, and I was pleased about that because I had admired his art for a long time, even though he and I are about the same, are approximately the same age.
Mm-hmm.
He started so much younger than I did.
Right.
And I knew his work. He was well known by the time I arrived in New York.
Also somebody who privileged construction, like the idea of construction or constructing an image. And also the image as object, or fluctuating between image and object.
Right. Well, yeah, they're more, yeah, they're a combination. A painting is an object. It takes its place in the room, just like a piece of furniture. It just has no utilitarian value. As we said, they're made to be looked at.
Right. There's some things one thing I always tell my students, I said, the secret of painting is it's a picture and a thing simultaneously.
Yes, it is a thing, right?
So it's kind of a paradoxical thing.
Yes, it is indeed. I would agree with that 100%.
Okay, so these are more elaborations on the zigzag, and I should make a point of saying that these are gigantic paintings. These are generally what, like 10 by 10 feet or 9 by 10 feet?
Yeah, these particular ones. I made smaller ones at some point, but what I was after here was the diagonal to create a more dynamic sort of quality. I have actually come back now to sort of totem-like images, but it keeps moving as long as I can keep moving it.
I think that's one of the things that's really significant about, the surveys. You can see all the changes, all the kind of leaps of faith you've made within your own work. And, when you see them all together, there's this incredible freedom and consistency as well. I mean, I think that's ultimately.
Well, what is not actually quite easy to see always is that I reach a certain point in a body of work that something happens accidentally or maybe even on purpose that leads me into another direction. So there's always a relationship. This is a body of work,
Right.
A family.
Right.
And there's aunts and uncles and first cousins and second cousins, and they don't all look alike.
It's like a Faulkner novel, right?
But there's still a relationship.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a Faulkner novel.
It's
Although I haven't read Faulkner in quite a while, but
No, I mean, I'm just mentioning it because I know that you mentioned that you had read him a bunch like early on.
yeah, early on I did. Sweetie.
So yeah, there was, I was thinking about Faulkner just as I'm going to digress for a minute here, but in Sound and the Fury, there's the Benji character who he just thinks in terms of impressions.
Uh-huh.
And, he thinks in terms of like physical stuff all the time. And he's kind of like this, it's interesting for me. It's almost like, how an artist deals with facture. It's just, that's how they relate to the world. That's how we relate to the world. And it gets interpreted later, but it's really about impressions,
Well, he went to some pretty dark places at times.
Yes.
I read the last thing I read of Faulkner's was about 5-6 years ago. I read a book of short stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's just interesting. I was actually Sartre, used to write essays about Faulkner with regards to like existentialism.
I did not know that.
And that relates to your reading of Paul Tillich, the theologian Paul Tillich, and Paul Tillich is kind of interested in the idea of existentialism too.
Yeah, he is, absolutely.
It's interesting how that intersects with like abstract expressionism and that period in the 50s when existentialism had some relevance in art as an interpreter of art, but again, it's a digression. I apologize. Let's go forward. So here's a Lattice painting.
Lattice painting from 1986, an early one. These paintings are related to what my grandmother used to have in her garden. Lattices in which vines would grow up and flowering vines. And it relates to that as an idea of a memory. Now, what got me started in this, I'm not absolutely sure. I've sort of forgotten how this series started. But
this painting is in the Chelsea show, which I visited last weekend. It's extraordinary in person, especially the kind of light olive drab field and how that unifies all the colors.
Right. Yeah, when I've done these, I've always worked out of a color field, and I'm actually doing some of these lattices now in which I'm floating them.
Right.
So they're not attached to the edges.
Right. Like some of Mondrian's compositions, the lines don't go all the way to the edge.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating, right?
Sure. It brings interest there, for sure.
For me, it seems to be playing with that hinge between the image and the object, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something goes off the picture plane, it's like implies infinity. If something's within the picture plane, it could imply it's just limited to that picture plane, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, this is constructive. I know that you studied architecture, but it wasn't for you, but there is this constructive sensibility in your work.
I think architecture and some other courses I took in relationship to the architecture program influenced what I do as a painter. Certain formal aspects. I think of the elements of design, line form, texture, color, space. I think of balance, asymmetrical or symmetrical, like this is a symmetrical balance.
Somebody,
These come out of studying architecture initially
right.
when I think of those.
One of our participants, G.E. Schwartz, is mentioning the lattice being like a rosebud moment, like referring to Citizen Kane.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, you know, when you mentioned your grandmother's lattice, it also made me think of one of your early memories in your biography, in your book, when you talk about encountering what looked like a coral snake, but it was a king snake.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. I had no idea what it was, but I didn't want to, I knew to stay away. And I got my mother to come out and take a look. She thought it was a coral snake.
Right, which is highly poisonous.
Yes, highly poisonous. And it looks almost exactly like the king snake, except I think it's red and black don't touch. If the red and black touch, it's a coral snake.
Right. And it's also the sequence.
They say red and black kill a fella. Something like that.
But it's, you know, it's an interesting kind of like, again, like a rosebud moment or an early memory. It's like a sequence of colors that means something, but there's an illusionism too, like with the king snake, probably a protective illusionism.
I remember it was really quite interesting because of the color, the stripe, the way it was striped, and then the white in between. It was a very interesting snake. And I can see how a child would pick it up, you know, but I knew to stay away because I had been warned that there were poisonous snakes around. This was in Florida. So.
Yes, yeah. Can we continue to the next slide, please?
Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting painting. Sort of an anomaly in a way, but it relates very much to later on to what I call the steps, or the cityscape sort of paintings that I did later on. This is almost a black and white painting, but not quite. As you see, there's some color here and there peeking through. Mm-hmm. But it was one of my favorite paintings. I always liked this painting very much, and it's good to see it out of the racks and hanging. Thank you.
It's extraordinarily complex.
You think so?
Well, I mean, some of you, there's an interesting like dance between complexity and simplicity in your paintings. Mm-hmm. Some of them are very frank and simple. Yeah, I mean, on first view, but this one seems very complex.
It does, by comparison. I understand.
Right. It seems closer to the drawings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe that's just an aspect of it being black and white as well, but.
Well, there was a lot of drawing that went on in this painting before it got, you know, became a painting. There was a lot of drawing underneath.
And sometimes, you know, we might not be able to see that in these slides, but sometimes I encourage everybody to see the shows. I mean, they're really inspiring. But if you see the shows, if you see the works in person, you can see all of the, you know, the kind of excisions, and you can see the drawing.
This is sort of the history of the painting.
Yes.
What I like to leave is for you to see in a way, or have a hint about how the painting was made.
Right.
That's important to me. I think that's part of the expression that painting offers.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, that's part of the facture. It's not just representational, it's literal.
Right.
Can we go to the next slide?
Brooklyn Bridge, 1993. I've moved into these, what I call prismatic. I don't even know if that's a word in the English language or not. It would have been a good name for a rock and roll band.
The Prismatics, yeah.
Right. But I refer to them as prismatic because of the fractured look of them. This was the first one I did, and I was experimenting a lot about where to end the triangles at the edges. And so you can see there's a sort of change in plan as the painting developed.
Uh-huh.
I left those lines in front so that it has a different kind of space than most of them later, the later ones that I did. And so it's a little bit of an anomaly in that body of work.
It's interesting though, because since we were just talking about drawing, you could see there's quite a structure of drawing here.
You can see some pencil drawings in there, some pencil lines.
And also, you know, an interesting kind of genealogical connection would be with Joseph Stella. You know, his depiction in like in the 20s of the Brooklyn Bridge, his famous Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that Joseph Stella was actually one of Mel Price's mentors.
I did not. He studied with him.
Yeah.
Mel did.
Yes. At the art students.
I knew he studied with Keniyoshi.
Yes.
But I didn't know he studied with.
Yeah, I believe it was at the Art Students League.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But you know, there's a similar kind of like.
Mel started when he was quite young.
Yes.
Toward making paintings. I mean,
right.
He died at 50 years old, so he wasn't around a long time, but he was very prolific.
Just to fill everybody in, Mel Price is extremely important in Thornton's early development, being a mentor at the University Alabama at Tuscaloosa. Prior to Thornton's coming to New York, Mel Price is an abstract expressionist. I think we have one of his images at the end there. Who inspired you, Thornton, right? I just want to.
Well, he inspired me in terms of ideas about painting. Not so much. I couldn't paint like him.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even try. I mean, his paintings were what he made, but he inspired me to go for it, to actually become a painter. And he encouraged me to go to New York. Now, I used to ask him, why don't you go back to New York? He had somebody had offered him a teaching job at the studio school, Mercedes Matter. And I said, why don't you go back to New York? He said, oh, well, I'm down here. You know? But anyway.
And he was close to Franz Klein. He was a good friend of Franz Klein's.
Very close friends with Klein. Yes.
I think they taught together in Pennsylvania for a period.
Yes, they did. And then Klein came back to New York.
Right.
Mel went to Alabama. So that's kind of what happened, I think.
There is a pragmatic kind of progress, though, when you think of not so much Joseph Stella, but when you think of the American precisionist with those kind of vectors, you know, like Keeler, those vectors are kind of going through they're approximating cubism in a way, or making their Egypt, right?
Yeah. Well, I always felt these were related somewhat to cubism.
I was thinking also of Picasso's like Handkerchief in his Weeping Women series, you know, the kind of cubistically folded up handkerchief.
Right.
Also in Demoiselles. I know that Demoiselles d'Avignon was an important painting for you as well.
Absolutely.
Can we forward the slides, please? And this is called Black Bear?
Black Bear, yeah. I had seen a black bear recently before I started this painting, and the black bear was quite impressive. So I wanted to make a painting that was as impressive as that black bear. I'm not sure I managed to do that, but I tried.
I think
It's a pretty good painting, I think.
it's, it's interesting that John Yao in his review of your show mentions the black nationalist colors, like Marcus Garvey, black nationalism, red, yellow, and black. That wasn't necessarily a conscious choice on your part.
Say again.
That kind of associative color wasn't necessarily a conscious choice on your part.
Oh no, I use color right off the top of my head, really.
Right.
I respond to one color. I seek to find colors that work well together.
Right.
But I don't work out of any theoretical color theory or
Interesting again, though, that relationship to phenomena, right? That direct relationship, like the king snake or your grandma's lattice, that direct relation to translating phenomena.
Yes.
Non-representationally.
Right.
And here's a great example of
representing your life in a way.
Yes, right. Taking your life seriously.
Yes. You put yourself into the painting, you try to.
Right. And in the upper left here, you can see one of those lines that you kind of whited out, but you left it in there.
Yeah. You can see a few of those pencil lines. And when I started to cover them up, I decided not to leave them there again to give you an idea about the history of the painting.
Right. And again, I think John Yao said he was fascinated by the fact that your paintings look finished and unfinished simultaneously.
Right. I want them to have that feeling that it's because the painting is really never quite finished.
Right. It also lets the viewer in a way to participate in the process.
Yeah, and you want to do that. That's an important thing, I think, to have happen.
And so can we go to the next slide, please, Carolyn? So these are obviously all kind of in the same period from the same.
Yes.
Right.
I started using these heavy lines, and I used them for quite a while in these paintings and some other paintings.
Makes me think of that Stuart Davis painting, Lines Thicken.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that Stuart Davis painting, Lines Thicken.
I'm not familiar with that particular painting.
Well, it's kind of like an in-joke, with him. He also made these kind of very distinct shapes. His own version of Cubism, I think,
Right. Cubism influenced a lot of people.
But something does happen when the lines thicken. I mean, they do become much more aggressively structural.
Yeah, that's what I was after. That constructive feeling in the painting.
Also, this painting has a lot of drips, and it's an interesting point that you've made about your drips before. You might want to.
Well,
I mean, would you want to elaborate on that?
When sometimes those drips happen, and if you're not happy with them, you take them out. But if you like them, they become part of the painting. It's part of how the painting got done.
Right.
And it activates the surface.
Right. And so I mean, somebody might think that they're just an index of like the activity, and that they don't change, but you do change them. I mean, you do paint some out.
Yes. Oh yeah, I take a lot of them out. Sometimes almost all of them. Or sometimes
like I noticed. I'm sorry.
Sometimes I take all of it. If they're drips, I might take all of them out.
There was a painting in David Richards' Chelsea Gallery. It just had one. It had one drip.
Oh yeah, I think I know the thing.
Yeah, it was like I was like, wow, that's intentional.
Right.
And Zinger.
Yeah. It
The
was-
other thing about drips that's interesting too is like I remember seeing the de Kooning Daughter to the River painting,
Uh-huh.
and they act as signifiers of scale too.
Yeah, it does, absolutely.
It's something that people don't really talk about with drips, but you know
I never thought about that actually, but it does.
Yeah, no, I just had this, I had this kind of epiphany in front of Daughter to the River, because that's very sloppy, like a lot of drips. And I was like, well, this drip, you know, it's kind of like doing this perspectival thing, you know.
Right. It creates activity there.
Right, right. Can we go to the next slide, please?
de Kooning.
So what do you title this series? It's untitled.
Well, steps or cityscapes. It's sort of, this is an early one. And I'd seen some paintings that sort of influenced me. I don't really remember exactly where I saw them, but it started me in this direction. And then following paintings are, they change a bit from here. But that's where the beginning of that series.
And this one's kind of more strongly vertically oriented than some of the other.
Yeah, it is very vertical.
Sometimes that's a tough.
That was something about the paintings I remember I saw. They were very vertical.
Mhm.
Clifford.
And it might have been Clifford Still.
Mhm. How did that change your constructive approach? Like when it's the proportion of the canvas?
Say again?
How does the proportion of the canvas change your approach towards your construction of your image?
Just the shape of the canvas in and of itself dictates the image to some extent.
Right.
How it's balanced, how it's whether there's enough variety within the unity.
Right.
So the shape of the canvas does have a lot to do with it. I mean, Barnett Newman, the polemicist, as they called him, he did one strip, right? It was about 4 inches wide or something.
Right. Right.
So that had something to do with how the painting looked, I'm sure.
Right. And this is an interesting palette too. It's red, yellow, and black, which,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I don't know, maybe for anybody else, but for me, it trends symbolic. Like this reduced palette, as opposed to some of your earlier palettes, which are more kind of prismatic.
Mm-hmm.
They include more of the color wheel.
Yeah.
This in the scope of your work, since this is just reduced to 3 colors, I know there's some orange in there too, but
Yeah, a little.
for me, it just, I mean, just as the observer, it trends more symbolic.
Uh-huh. Well, there's really no symbolism in my work, not intentional anyway.
Right.
If it's there, it's subconscious.
Right. Right. No, I wouldn't impose that on that, but it's an observer's observation.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, maybe this is, I think one of our participants is mentioning the coral snake again. The coral snake memory of the sequence of the red, yellow, and black.
Right. Killer.
But again, I mean, those things exist in memory. You've made it very clear that those things are called up mysteriously. It's not necessarily, there's no direct relation. Yep. Right.
Well, one of the things that just occurred to me is the whole time I've been making painting has pretty much been under attack. They told me it was dead before I came to New York. Got to New York and I found out it was indeed quite alive.
Right.
So there's always a lot of painting there, but there's always a lot of criticism and a lot of attack thrown toward it.
No, I think it's a really important point to make, especially with your career spanning such a long you know, definitions of historical periods, you know, which are usually applied after the fact. That, yeah, that's a constant, like painting is constantly dying
Yeah.
or being declared dead. So
I think Warhol said that at some point in the early 60s or something. And yet he made a lot of paintings afterwards. You know? So
well, yeah, it's also like this.
it was just something he said at some point. Somebody made more out of it than needed to be, probably.
Yeah, and it's also like a Beckett idea of like, you know, just keep on going, right?
Yeah, right.
Last
Keep on-
man standing.
Right.
Can we go to the next slide, please, Carolyn?
Wow, this is a small, very small painting, 2003, 24 by 18 inches. But it's a very strong little painting. I like the painting very much. I made a few of these small paintings that I thought were real strong, and this is one of them.
The scale of this looks like it's, you know, 5 by 6 feet.
Yeah, it does. I wish it were.
It's pretty powerful, small painting.
Yeah, it is, and it's when you see it in the flesh, it's a powerful little painting, right?
Next slide, please, Carolyn. And here is obviously a black, kind of a almost black and white version.
Almost black and white, but there's a little color in there. So another prismatic painting from 2007. It's called Starstruck. I was reading a lot about quantum physics at the time, so I picked up some titles for paintings from some of the books I was reading. I read Brian Greene. I read all of his. I read about 3 of his. The Elegant Universe was the first. I don't know if you've read any of those books, but
no, but I mean, you know, it's interesting what artists read, right? You know.
Yeah, I just, you know, somebody suggests something sometimes, or I got interested in quantum physics, actually, kind of wanting to know a little more than I did, and I got into it pretty well as a lay person. I understood some concepts. I've forgotten most of it at this point.
But it is relevant. It's relevant for painters who are thinking about like particle versus field, right?
Yeah.
Viewpoint versus kind of like all over. And I think your wife Vered Lieb made the point in her essay in your book that Niels Bohr actually owned a painting by the cubist Jean Jeanneret, and that he used it, you know, when people came over as an example of complementarity, which is a hard word to say, but
complementarity, yeah.
And that's the title of one of your paintings, actually.
Yeah.
What is complementarity? In a nutshell.
It's the opposite.
Okay, so is it opposites held together in a field? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please.
But I like the.
It's a great title. It's.
And these prismatic paintings, those shapes, those triangular shapes are fractals.
Right.
They represent fractals. And so
right.
You could just represent those for almost anything.
Right.
Everything
and it's all
fractals.
Right. It's also the micro and the macro. It's universal.
Yeah.
The connection of the micro to the macro, and the field is continuous.
Right.
You know, maybe we can go to some of the slides of the actual show, so we can see some of Thornton's paintings in context. Carolyn, I think they're much later in the queue. Now, here's a great kind of comparison from an early work and a mid,
Mhm.
right?
That's that early slat painting. That's from what year is that from? 68 or something like that, 69.
And there's a lattice painting.
And the lattice painting is much more. But there's relationship there. I mean, and
I think the thing that's fascinating about the show is you go into the gallery and you see these relationships, you see the shifts, but then you see the relationships.
yeah.
And I think the reach of your stylistic,
Well, here
it's amazing.
There's two vertical bands on either end, and then happens here too.
Right, and what happens at the edges, like at the edges on the slat painting, there are different things happening, and similar to the lattice painting, like the orange on the lower left is different than the red on the lower right.
Say again now.
Well, what's happening on the margins of the paintings do have some.
You're talking about the slat painting.
The slat paintings has these different things happening on the margins, and then the same thing with the lattice painting, where there's an orange on the bottom and a red. Right.
It changes there, right?
Maybe we can take a look at some more of the slides. Is this in the this is in the Harlem space, right?
Chelsea.
Oh, this is the Chelsea space. Okay. Another interesting kind of correlation there.
Yeah, that's a little unusual for that body of work in that it's vertical instead of horizontal.
Uh-huh.
I usually made those in the other direction.
Right.
But I enjoyed this painting.
It's got cardboard.
It's got some evidence of the masking off. I masked off with large pieces of cardboard. I put them off afterwards, and sometimes parts of them would stick because the
right
in that painting. Yeah.
One thing, I've done that too in my own painting, and one thing that I liked about that is the cardboard is like a physical shape I can move around.
Right.
Like rather than thinking about it in my head, I could just kind of
right.
prove to myself how these things work. Right.
Right. I like the kind of edges you would get from masking off with those, as opposed to masking tape. Although I use a lot of tape also.
Right. You wouldn't necessarily call your work hard edged. I don't think.
No, it's kind of soft edge.
Right.
Hard edge, soft edge.
Can we go to the next slide, please? And this is also in Chelsea.
This is in Chelsea, yes.
This is an interesting juxtaposition because it shows kind of the negative space.
Yeah, I like the way those two paintings link together.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Again, the Chelsea space.
Chelsea space. Good looking space.
Yes. And this is the uptown space.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That painting there had a very heavy surface. This particular painting, you can't see that on the screen.
The one on the left.
Yeah, the one on the
yes.
left. It was a mixture of oil paint and acrylic, which I very seldom do that. But this was a mixture of, and it built up a kind of a very pimpled, almost like surface.
You did shift early on. You were working primarily with acrylic paint, but you shifted around 2000 into working primarily with oil paint. Yeah,
for a number of years. And
why did you do that? Why did you think to do that?
Well, I painted a lot with acrylic paint because it was cheap.
Right.
And I could afford. I didn't have much money.
Right.
A lot of time, and I had a little more money, so I always wanted to paint with oil. I painted with oil before, but working on these large paintings, I was trying to keep the cost down.
Right.
So I I wanted to, I made the acrylic basically just from the medium, and I mixed sometimes dry pigment. Now I'm using tempera,
Right.
you know, but I'm not sure where I was going at, but anyway.
No, I mean, it's just always interesting to figure out, like, what a material will do. And from my perspective, your acrylic paintings are very vivid. Like, they don't necessarily have that flat aspect of a lot of acrylic paint.
Yeah. I don't know if we have too many of the oil paintings in this. There's at least one or two.
I'm gonna at this point, since we're getting close to our time, and I don't, I want to respect your time, Thornton. I'm gonna ask David Richard if he has anything to say. David Eichholz, I'm sorry, of David Richard Gallery, if he has anything to say about this process of choosing what is one of the first significant assemblages of Thornton's work in New York.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. When I went to the studio and we started looking at the paintings, I think originally we were going to do a sort of a smaller show. But we'd always thought it would be sort of a survey, but I never dreamed it was going to be so inclusive and comprehensive until we went into the studio and started pulling things and looking at them and realized there were representatives, and several really great and multiple representatives of several of these different series where he went back and revisited them. Like he said, the dime or the triangles and then the prismatics, which changed extremely, and the vector angles and the scale of the triangles in their transition. Also the lattices, he's revisited the lattices, I think like 3 times now. Like he said, the series right now that he's working on, they're floating. And he always finds a nuance that's really subtle and different. So, I thought it was, when we saw the range of things and how well everything worked together, and Thornton touched on this, is that everything is sort of spawned out of a mistake or some idea out of one series that logically leads to the next. I was just taken aback by how the painterliness, the application of the paint, and the way he approached the combination of drawing and painting, and even his editing, was maintained through nearly 70 years. And it was just astounding to me. And so I guess my big takeaway point with Thornton's work, sorry?
I don't think it's quite 70. More like 60.
It's 60, but it's 7 decades.
I'm pretty old, not quite that.
But the thing that struck me the most was just how much Thornton's work is really, regardless of the composition or structure, is the act of painting. And he kind of touched on this a little bit when he said painting, is process. But you can just tell his emotional connection with the movement and the fluidity of paint, and how all of these, even though you wouldn't think a geometric painting would be painterly, they are. And that's why the experience is so important. And that's why I thought doing a comprehensive survey was really important. The trick here was the architecture in our building and trying to get it so that the scale of these worked well. But what I tried to do is bring them together. As you've noticed here in Chelsea, the one side has things that are a lot of black in them, and it sort of unifies them and pulls them together. But I wanted them to be didactic and almost feel like you were in his studio. Because when I was in his studio and we were pulling the paintings out and they were all lined up around the place, I didn't find it chaotic at all. I found it exhilarating, to be honest. So that's why I was wanting to try and capture that feeling of that just rawness and that passion of just paint and moving paint and the vibrancy of color. I wanted to kind of capture that, because when you go into a studio, that's how it feels. Especially when we had everything drug out and you could see him. But when Thornton works, he only works on one painting at a time and the others are sort of turned away. And so it's not as, chaotic as when we were trying to work through the paintings. But that was sort of how I ended up talking him into curate the show, let us curate the show this comprehensively, because I thought it was just such a rare opportunity to see all these together and get that experience.
Well, I think it's amazing, David, that that came together, because I think this is really, to me, one of the most significant shows I've seen in New York in quite a long time of painting.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very inspiring. It's, very inspiring.
Painting's not dead, trust me.
Absolutely.
So at this point, it's about an hour, and usually what we'd like to do is hand it off to a few questions. So if you're, and then our poetry reading. So thank you so much, Thornton. Really, it's been great to get to know you and your work. And thank you for doing this, because I think a lot of people got a lot out of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Thornton. It's been a privilege.
It was my pleasure, and an opportunity for me to say a few things about my work.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Yeah, I'd love to turn it over to a few of our participants for questions. First, we have from Lori. If you should be able to unmute, let me just find you here.
I just wanted to say thank you to David.
Oh, yeah. Yes, thank you all. Let's see, Lori, are you able to? There you are. Okay.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you start with a sketch, or if you do sketching.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
If you start with a sketch.
Do I start with the sketch? Okay.
Or are you just more intuitive, facing the blank canvas?
Well, both. I do work from sketches at times, and at other times it comes off the top of my head.
Thanks.
I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lori. Next, we have Carrie Smith. Let's see, get you unmuted here. You should be able to unmute yourself. Okay, yeah.
Hi, Thornton. I've admired your work for many years. I feel like I saw a big painting at the Museum of Modern Art in a painting show way back. But
yeah, I was in a show at the Museum of Modern Art.
One of those big wedges, or?
Yes.
Yeah. So my wife and I came into New York, which we do once in a while, and we came into Chelsea, and I ran up to see the show in the space in Chelsea. And they were photographing it, and they let me in. The show wasn't open yet, but the painting as you walked in on the right, and Tom mentioned the kind of khaki green color as the ground color, that big lattice painting.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I have two questions. First of all, there's a little painting behind you that has this bright green and pink and red and bright yellow. And if you compare that color, that palette in that painting to, say, the big paintings, the big painting I just mentioned, it seems like your palette has evolved considerably. And I'm curious about your feelings about becoming much brighter, it seems.
I like it. I don't know why that's happening. Maybe because I'm getting older, and I want to see things brighten up for me.
Yeah.
So I like to reach for color, and the color has increased. The strength of the color has definitely.
And am I right that you're using tape and that there's bleeding?
I'm using tape now.
Yeah. That's interesting, and that you allow it to bleed under the tape. Is that correct?
I do sometimes, yeah. It happens accidentally, and sometimes I correct it, or sometimes I leave it if I like what's happening with it.
Makes sense with the expressive nature of your paintings. I have one other little quick.
Right.
I noticed in looking at your website and also in the pictures that Tom put up on the screen that in numerous paintings, there's the use of outlines. Sometimes they're dark.
Right.
that little one had these brown lines that you mentioned was a very
Right.
strong painting. And then there are the paintings without the outlines. And
Right.
I was curious about your thoughts about outline and not outline in your work.
Well, they're just two different ways of expressing yourself and about making the painting. How do you make a painting? Well, there's no one way to make a painting. So I tried different things, experimenting in various areas. So those lines were important to me at one point. But then later, I decided to move away from them. And I found that exciting also.
What made you decide to move away?
Simplification.
Good question.
Simplification.
Just simplification, I guess.
Hmm.
My work has become more minimal,
Hmm.
more recent. Well, not all. I mean, earlier on, I did some minimalist paintings as well.
Sure.
But now the work is becoming more minimal in general.
Well, thanks for all you've done. And you have a great shirt on too, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. So do you. I like your shirt.
Oh, thanks. Be well.
Thank you so much for your questions.
You're welcome.
You be well.
Yeah. Let's see. Next, we'd like to ask our friend GE to unmute. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you, Tom, and thank you, Thornton.
Say your name again. I'm sorry.
GE or Jerry.
Jerry. Hi,
Yeah,
Jerry.
That's
Nice to
cool.
see you.
Thank you. In working with imperfection, do you find that the struggle to kind of forgive reality for being exactly what it is right now often gives you the opportunity to break through to kind of a non-dual consciousness to get to pure awareness?
I think so. I believe you're absolutely hit it on the head. I appreciate what your assessment.
Because I get that as a contact high from just looking at your work. So it's brought me there too. So thank you.
They make me a little high sometimes too.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
My pleasure.
Thank you, GE.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Joan Thorne. You should be able to unmute. It's just the bottom left microphone icon there. Oops.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we are. I think we got it.
Yeah, my question was simply,
Hi,
I don't
Jen.
know, I'm thinking of Giacometti, and I wondered if Giacometti, if Thornton, I mean, I know you've probably seen his drawings and paintings, and I was thinking to ask Thornton, what does he feel that there's any connection with Giacometti in terms of the way Giacometti, especially in his drawings?
There may well be, Joan. But it's not something that I have been conscious of.
Okay. Okay.
But I appreciate your mentioning.
Yeah, I find Giacometti is, along with yourself, is a great artist.
Well, thank you. Thank you for mentioning me in the same sentence.
And to me, this interview has been an eye-opener. I've known your work for many years, and I've known you, but it's been an eye-opener as solidifying what your work is about. So thank you very much, everyone who made this show possible, including Thornton, who made the paintings.
Well, thank you. And Joan is a very fine painter herself.
Oh, thank you for the compliment.
It's true.
Coming from you, That's a big compliment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Thornton. And for our final question comment, we'll turn it over to our very own Fong Hui. Should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Congratulations, Thornton, on the.
Thank you, Fong.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's
been a while.
I know. I mean, I remember we met in the maybe mid-90s through James Little. We've been show together. That's James put together.
Right, he put a show together and we were both in it. Right.
That's right. At least 3 instances. But it's nice to see the painting have final proper treatment and representation of very, very, I would say, elegant. So credit go to David.
Well, I feel very good about the show. David did a terrific job.
Yeah, it's just nice to see our friend getting their final recognition. So this is one of the instances. It might begin with our other friends, beginning with Ron Gorchoff, and then it's you know, recently for sure, Tom, who actually did a lengthy interview with him too. Namely with Marie Adam and
with Ron Gorchoff, you're saying?
Ron finally, yes, although he's not with us anymore.
Oh, I know, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
He was a good friend.
Very good friend. But the what I, you know, I've been wanting to ask this since I think there's a certain kind of distinction I would you know, associate with your work, Thornton, is that
there's kind of extension.
It's distinction in the sense they are, you know, very, very particularly New York painted. They're very urban. In other words, early on, those repetitive, irregular strike together, it's kind of reminded us of SoHo floor, the wooden floor.
Yeah, right. So that's why I call them slats, because
yes, absolutely. And then
relationship to the floor. The roller I used was about the width of the boards, the floorboards.
Yeah. And I was thinking in reference to a lot of our friends, you know, for example, Jack Whitten, when he was doing his own process, developer.
Right, I knew Jack. And
of course, absolutely. Another artist that came to mind was your old friend, Stuart Hitch.
Yes, absolutely.
Another very exceptional group of artists, but I think what makes your work stand out, particularly in your own, I would say, environmental, architectural, as well as urban. Very, very specific in that there's window, there's building, there's architecture that Tom had mentioned, but there's certain particularity in how they rotate in their relentless, undissimilar, I would say, deployment of rectilinear, even when they fall into a certain complex wedded diagonals.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that. Thank you.
And there's also a sense of temperature and rhythm. Okay, so to make my question a little bit more succinct, the sense of temperature is very particular in the way you mix your own pigment and color. And the other I would add is the sense of light and rhythm tied to, I don't know whether it would be correct to relate the word melody.
Jazz music.
Yeah. So how much is that tied to your own interest in jazz? I've been wanting to ask that for a long time, Thornton.
It's obvious.
Okay, good.
The rhythm, the intervals.
The surprise.
The surprise.
The improvisation.
The improvisational.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes them very, very different from one painter to the next, for sure.
Yeah. I have the courage to be as myself.
Yeah.
as
Right.
so.
Yeah. Well, the presence of the hand
I
and
mean, that's the only way to be a painter. You have to
yeah,
bring it from yourself.
absolutely. I think what I can add is that the gesture of your hand is very distinctly how it look on the
That's
canvas.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's
No, it's terrific. So
something I strive for.
yeah, I would urge everyone to go see the two show as soon as you can, because
It will be up about 2 more weeks.
they're very celebratory of New York at
Yeah.
this very moment. And what I love about it too, I don't like to use the word patina, but there's a certain aspects of New York being dusty. I think that dustiness is in the color, how you mix the pigment.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, I just adore that. The imperfection of New York City with all the, yeah, not the air is not so clean, you know, Thornton. You certainly have that in the painting. So
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
oh, thank you for coming on.
And I'm very happy that you kept the Brooklyn Rail going.
Yeah, no, it's after 21 plus years, Thornton, just like you, people like you, artists like you, is what give us the strength and the wisdom.
Yes.
Because when you love something, you stick with it until you die.
Absolutely.
And 21 plus year, I believe.
Oh, you had a dream, right?
It's just a little beginning of the rail.
Right.
I learned how to fight like
You're
you
right.
have and stay
Been
afloat.
around for a long time.
Yep, that counts, you know, that count very much. So thank you, Thornton.
My
And
pleasure.
congratulations.
Great
And
to see you.
great to see you. Go see the show, you guys. Back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Fang. So it is our tradition to end the community events at the Rail with a poetry reading. And today I'm so thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Erin Pérez, to the stage. Erin Pérez is a senior writing major at Pratt. She is primarily a poet, but she also works across different disciplines such as photography, painting, and ceramics. Recently, she has completed writing her final iteration for her senior thesis, a manuscript titled Still or Perpetual Adoration. She's from Panama City, Panama. With that, I'd like to welcome Erin. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation to witness. I'm so grateful to be here. The first two pieces that I'm going to read, already wrote them, are some untitled sonnets. So. The gringos came to split the continent in half. That's what they wanted, division, to kill something and call it prosperity. I drove over the idea of modernity back when I loved so many people and they would say they loved me back. And this restless blue gap we were crossing over felt mended by the great blunt wrap in my mouth. The car hotboxed, perspiring. I'm so anxious I never cry, only slow down below the speed limit in Arrejang, aided by a lover in the passenger seat to strip off my sticky button-down top one arm at a time. I never wanted to lose control. I only wanted to focus my eyesight on everything at once. Maybe we should have come up with a tongue that was just ours, but how do we stop talking over each other in two languages at once? And then this is the second sonnet. When I say I like to feel every joint in my spine curve taut against my skin, suddenly that is concerning to you. Oh, I say, wanting only to concern you more. I could spend long hours tracing my finger across your body, comparing the undertones in our skin, recounting different times I've wanted to drape my body on you like a crocheted blanket on a couch, limp, liquid, thrown. What do you think heaven looks like is such a mundane question. I want questions like I want seawater, choking in microplastic, undigestible, unstable. I want them to leave behind a taste of dirt and metal in my mouth. I am patient. I will always wait for the tide to cover my feet again once it leaves. And then this last piece is the third in a series of poems that I wrote that was inspired by Frank O'Hara's last long poem called Biotherm for Bill Berkson. This is called On Gesture 3. On Grand, there are two girls sharing a spliff held between chipped black nail polished fingernails, blowing the smoke to the side, phone blaring, and they giggle. And I just love it when women have fun. A while back, I told my mother that all I wanted was a nice blue-collared buffalo man with a big beer belly that he would scratch while watching the football game, asking me to bring him another Sam Adams from the fridge. My mother looked me dead in the eye and said, no man like that would want me. I would not want a man like that either. So who cares? I'll make my dry oatmeal with way too much cinnamon and turmeric, and I'll still relish it as a meal of independence, even though I'm not that hungry anymore. I'll let the frozen berries melt on top of the oats, and I'll swear it's the best meal I've ever had. I'll let the breath enter my belly through my nose, and I'll let it go through my mouth, and it doesn't make me sore anymore. I remember the times I was starving, when I would cook meals for a lover and feel satisfied piling hot food onto his plate and taking the scraps for myself, when I could run my hands down my chest to my belly and feel a flat line all the way down. And I thought that, oh, I have no idea what I thought, but I'm really into honey and cream, both of them at the same time, in an English breakfast tea that I carry in my travel mug. That makes me happy. I just want to point out how beautiful it is to be seen. I don't know much, but I know good lighting, and I think I have a lot of it. Cream blush applied with fingers, aquaforte mi carita linda, finally the perfect shade of a brick red lipstick. I don't want to shave my head and forget things anymore. I've been in an archival era where I'm increasingly interested in keeping things, growing my hair down to the floor and collecting dust particles in my lungs. Things that I'm loving, permanence, working through things together, getting to eat jasmine rice whenever I want, the perfect jammy egg with rice vinegar and soy sauce, short skirts, hoarding all the beauty in the world in between my teeth gaps, vessels, basins, a thick white cotton baby tee that shows just the right amount of nipple, the slow high of a tincture, getting to smell a lover's neck and kiss it, wearing a Persian tea room perfume. I saw the Louise Bourgeois exhibit at the Jewish Museum, and she said, to unravel a torment, you have to begin somewhere. So I thought, well then, let's begin. I am a legacy of all my hysteric women everywhere that carry their uteruses in their fake Prada bags, that withdraw off antipsychotics to shock and disbelief, play a game of censor or be censored, carry the world cupped like river water in their hands, and are trying to pry the pieces of God with a crowbar out of them constantly, if only to stroke it gently with one finger. Así como Margarita de baile que vio una estrella aparecer y la quiso ir a coger, así soy yo también, Margarita. I only want the entire universe buried at the roots of my teeth, so then cavities are only the blackest of holes, viral, contagious, encompassing. And I don't think that's too much to ask for. As a child, I would lick my hands and rub them together, the spit and friction trying to squeeze out an essential thread. I've been braiding my hair now. That's an essential thread. A note to how I've always wanted to tie things together. I keep looking in mirrors, and it's nice for once to not be looking for anyone and stare straight right back at her, unblinking. The love's in the creamed honey and in the McDonald's chicken nuggets and the omelets with goat cheese and crunchy chili oil. The love's in the South. It's in religion, heat, memory. It's in only having one tit out in the name of modesty. Women just want to talk about death and decay, and men don't want to listen about how the potatoes made the bananas rot faster. They don't like it when you talk about how you want to get silicone implants in your tits so that there will be something left of you in the ground once everything else blends with the earth. I just need the whole living earth to remember me. I just need the whole dead earth to remember me too. I just need to listen to folk music and drive 3 hours upstate to kiss the open breeze on the mouth and visit the unknown dead, the mother, the womb, and the holy cheeks, pinched in a flurry and a flush over stovetops, scraping rice right out of the pan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was really beautiful. Wow, yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Thornton and Tom. We would also like to thank Vered, David Richard, and David Eichholz for helping to make today's event possible. We encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a big tribute to Mary Beth Edelson, featuring speakers Elaine Angelopoulos, Susan B., Kristen Clifford, Meredith Drum, Donna Kessinger, Dina Mueller, Gorilla Girl Alice Neal, Gabriella Shakula, Kathleen One-Track, and Kat Griffin, with contributions by Roxana Fabius, Joyce Kozloff, Lucy Lepard, Janet Olivia Henry, Alicia Smith, Jillian Steinhauer, and with a concluding reading by Kay Turner. And you can now please turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you all leave. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
It
was wonderful. Inspiring.
Thank you.
So much.
Wonderful. Yes.
Great
That's great.
Great
Thank
conversation.
you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Thornton.
Thank you. Thank you, Thornton. Congratulations. Thank you, Tom.
Congratulations.
Bye all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Thornton. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thornton.
Go see the show. You guys.
Yes, go see the show.
In flash, in person.
In the flesh, absolutely.
Absolutely, in the flash.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Oh, congratulations.
So much.
Bye all.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.